Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 2 years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question, not to prescribe you with a universal answer, but to help you find and define your own answer to this question. On the 34th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Pablo Escorcia. Pablo is a Berlin-based entrepreneur, a Biodanza teacher, yogi, consultant, and co-founder of Purpose+Motion, a group serving others to live out their own purpose and provoking change filled with meaning. In this episode, Pablo shares with us elements of his journey of searching for his own path through integrating the practical world of business, ancient wisdom, and the integral world of yoga and dance. We discuss Pablo's current explorations of open relationships and what he has learned from past relationships too, the significance of owning and communicating our humanity, the fundamental importance of trust in personal and business relationships, and the role that Biodanza plays in remembering what it is to be human and exploring new ways of relating to one another. If you are struggling to understand and express your needs in relationships, if you want to enhance the level of trust and courageous conversations in your life, or you're seeking new modalities to help you reimagine a different future, this episode will give you plenty to contemplate. I really wanted to interview Pablo for this episode as I believe he is someone who is somewhat of a bridge between ancient wisdom and the modern world. I always take a lot from my conversations with him, as I'm sure you will from this conversation too. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please leave a review, as I'd greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 34th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Pablo, thank you very much for joining me here on the What is a Good Life podcast today. As I recall, the first time we talked was in a co-working space in Berlin a few years ago, and you're someone who I've always wanted to do this interview with because you always seem to be so full of aliveness and life, and these are the type of conversations that I want to capture with people. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Mark, for the invitation.
As I tend to kick these conversations off with Pablo, it's with the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yes, plenty. More than one, usually at the same time, which, but now, especially now, I am very intrigued about human relationships, especially when talking about partnerships and different ways or constellations to see how relationships and loving relationships could be lived out. So I am in a moment in my life where I feel that I am able to challenge these old traditions of how loving relationships should be structured, and I'm opening myself to new and exciting ways of relating. So this is the question that I'm asking myself right now.
Could you elaborate on that, please, Pablo?
I was born in Colombia. And
Yeah.
Colombia is in South America in general is a very traditional continent in regards to family. So family is the nuclear family. We are brought up with and look and seeing everyone else in our context trying to create this mother family children structure to keep it working and to bring it forward. And what I have seen, even though this is somehow the default mode of relating and creating families in Colombia, I personally, I was always very, I was always questioning this tradition and this only one way of structuring a family. And luckily enough, I was able to leave Colombia and establish myself here in Berlin, and starting to be influenced by other ways of understanding how loving relationships could be lived out. And here in Berlin, there is plenty of influence of many different, you know what I mean, many different constellations of loving constellations, not only monogamic and very structured way of doing it, but in a much fluid way. And right now, especially in my life, this is the point where I find myself is trying to challenge these old beliefs and opening myself towards these new or alternative ways of living out loving relationships, which has been a beautiful gift and a challenge as well, because challenging all beliefs is not always pleasant.
It's really interesting you bring this up because
Mm.
I think it's amazing how little movement seems to happen in this area of investigating what, like, are there other ways. I look, we live in Berlin. It's a it's a melting pot of all different ideas, especially when it comes to the idea of relationships and different things like that. But it's so interesting to me that there can be so much resistance to this idea of challenging structured beliefs when the current model doesn't seem to work very well from a,
Hmm.
you know, a marriage divorce perspective, if you get
Hmm.
me. And then even within that, because I don't think it's just good relationship stay together, bad relationship divorce. It's there seem in the way in which we relate to each other, there seems to be a lot of, I don't know, dissatisfaction or a
Hmm.
lack of communication or a lack of, and this, like, you know, this isn't predicated on the model of relationship you're in. But I see when I talk to friends about their relationships, there's a real lack of just saying what you think and what you feel.
Hmm.
So what, even whatever about the structure of the relationship, I don't know. I think how we relate is such an interesting question.
And a fundamental one.
Yeah.
And this is a process that is happening since the moment we are born, not if not before, and it goes on this being acculturized or being part of a culture or being learning how to be part of a culture, how to be part of a society, is something that is an absolutely key in order to have a good life. Now connecting it to the main topic of this
Yeah.
podcast,
Yeah.
and as you say, there are traditional ways that we have somehow implemented and institutionalized, and this is one of the, trying to answer your question, this is one of the points that I have seen, is that, for example, here in Germany, people that are married, they have more tax exemptions than people that are single. So I earn exactly the same amount of money as my married business partner does. And at the same time, and even though that's the case, I am paying a little bit more taxes than he is, because he is in a married relationship, and then they have some joint. The tax authorities here in Berlin, they see them as a familiar unit,
Yeah.
and they become exceptions,
Yeah.
which I don't receive in my case. So there is an element of institutionalization that happens there, that somehow, in order for us to be able to live out in certain societies, we are incentivized to relate to one another in specific ways. And yeah, it is somehow, we have seen that in order for us to function well as human beings, we need some kind of support. And before this, the communities and the tribes were the ones who were providing that support, were providing the possibility for children to be brought up in a communal way. We are way past that. And normally, in especially Western societies, we transform the nuclear family, so mother, father, children, into the basic unit in which we organize in society. And then the responsibility of bringing up children falls down to the parents, and which is, of course, logical. Of course, parents need to be involved in bringing up children. But at the same time, being a father myself and having a lot of parents around me, I know that it can be overwhelming. Even
Yeah.
being two, it can be overwhelming to bring up one child. So again, I'm very curious to explore different ways of relating, different ways of living out loving relationships that are not necessarily institutionalized, that are going against the mainstream of where a lot of people are going. And at the same time, I fully agree with you that it makes sense, because the traditional ways of relating they don't have a very great rate of success. I let's put it like this.
In terms then of what you're saying then, what with what you're exploring at the moment, like when you whatever format of relationship you're looking at, like what are you seeing that's kind of lacking in the way that we relate? Like how are you investigating from your experience in life? Like what can we do? What can we do better, I guess?
Ooh, the first thing that comes to mind is honesty, transparency, and open communication.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that before. I I am 46 years old, so I'm not very young. I'm also not very old, but I think that I'm in a moment in my life where I have made mistakes in the way that I related before. I've learned, and now I'm trying to implement what I have learned. One of the biggest mistakes that I've made in the past when trying to explore these alternative ways of relating, or just being in a monogamous relationship, is trying to hide, trying to
Hmm.
hide my desires, my wishes, my needs, and trying to accommodate myself to the situation, guided by fear of losing that relationship. And I believe that has been disastrous for me in my own relationships. I've gone through a lot of moments of suffering and created suffering as well in my partners because of my lack of transparency, honesty, and open communication. So now that I've learned, now that I have the opportunity to do it differently, this has been my first priority every time with my partner. I have a long term relationship. I am in a long term relationship. And at the same time, we have been able to feel that relationship with meaning regarding openness. So, what does openness mean for us? Which is a very has been a very important topic of conversation for us, because openness can mean very different things. Opening a relationship can mean very different things, and it depends on the relationship, on the two people that are part of that relationship, and the meaning that we give to that definition of opening a relationship. So, um, what I have learned is that the more honest, straightforward, and transparent I can communicate my needs, wishes, and desires to my partner, and be open to receive my partner's wishes, needs, and desires, what I have learned is that instead of creating separation, that creates more empathy, rapport,
Hmm.
and um, and the feeling of togetherness. Uh,
Yeah.
I have learned to acknowledge my own humanity and my partner's humanity as well when talking about needs, wishes, and desires. Um, so I think that the way that we courageously communicate what we want and what we need is an absolute key to have good relationships, to build good relationships, to sustain good relationships, and eventually, again, to live a good life.
Oh man, you're saying so many things here that I think are so fundamentally important that I don't think people even realize what, like I don't think we examine how we relate anywhere near close enough.
Mm,
And once again, irrespective, like I'm not presently in an open relationship, but what you've just said there is so fun. And who knows what the future, like who knows what the future will bring in terms of what my wife or what I want as we move through life together. But what you've just said there is so important in terms of, I don't think people realize anywhere near as much how much fear is driving their behavior in relationships.
mm.
When you said that to me there, I think you hit an old wound in me, Pablo, because this is the first relationship I'm in where there has been a really high level of transparency and honesty. And it makes me think of a lot of scenarios before where so much of my decisions and how much I would accommodate for somebody else was driven from fear of losing somebody, was driven from fear, probably of being seen. And then this expression you have of acknowledging our own humanity, I could throw a million self projections on top of on top of that,
Yeah.
but that, like, that kind of sense that I think we carry so much shame in relationships for what I'm starting to see now is a very impersonal imprint of what it is just simply to be human.
Mm.
And we have this almost perfect idea of how one should be in a relationship, what your thoughts should be, what you should want, desire, all of these things. And they don't seem to correlate or fit very succinctly with what the actual experience is of being a human being. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's some. I think you've said some really big things there.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to clarify something, Mark, because this what I'm saying about straightforward, honest, open, transparent communication is useful not only when you're trying to open up a relationship. Yeah, it's also useful when you want to keep it. That's is very useful to create a safe and sacred space within the relationship. And then what do we
Yeah,
do with that is up to the couple, it's up to the people in the relationship. So it can be to open up a relationship, it can be just to close it down even further, which is if it is what the people involved in that relationship want. But still is how do we really own our humanity, wishes, desires, needs, and are courageous enough to put it out there.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really think fear, and I know I've said fear already, but this shame as well of how
Mm.
people, I think people are really constricted by how they feel they're supposed to be. And this goes just even their relationship with themselves and other areas of life as well.
Mm.
But particularly in intimate relationships with a partner or a lover, like I think there's a lot of shame that people experience.
Mm.
And if you can ever express that to your partner, man, it's so liberating, whatever you guys decide to do with that. But
Yeah.
it's just because I think we're depriving ourselves of, I don't know about from your experience, but we're depriving ourselves of the privilege of being fully seen and loved by
Mm-hmm.
somebody else. Be, be,
Which is in a way a paradox, isn't it? Because we say that we love someone, and someone else says that they love us, and still we're afraid to show ourselves fully.
yeah,
Um, so there is something there that is not right. There is something there that could be healthier. Let's put it like this.
yeah,
And I believe that learning to have better conversations with your intimate partners is one key to create nurturing relationships that are, as I was saying at the beginning, are that a foundational aspect of us reimagining society. So, in order for us to
Ooh,
be able to reimagine society, we need to be able to reimagine and open the spectrum of the types of loving relationships that we could have.
that's also that's also pretty substantial, I think, because I
Mm.
do believe, you know, whether it's relationships with our parents, with our lovers, with our siblings, with our friends, I do believe getting to this level of, because usually when we talk about intimacy, we consider a partner first, right? But
Hmm.
there's intimacy just in relating, right? And so I think when you feel safe enough to be yourself, that's where I think ideas can come from, that you now have the confidence or the I don't know, you feel secure enough to express them. Because I think so much of our, why we get so stuck in the same patterns all the time is because people don't want to expose themselves, they don't want to be seen. But this paradox that you mentioned as well is so, like, it's almost so delicious, like the idea
Hmm.
that, you know, you really feel that somebody loves you and you still won't share with them who your full self, like
Hmm.
that's amazing, isn't it? And there's no judgment on it, because Jesus,
We've
I've
all
done it
been
many
there,
many
of course.
times.
We've all
Yeah,
been
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Hmm. And it's interesting because I connected to my work as a business consultant, and which within organizations, within teams, communication is always something that is mentioned as something that at least could be improved, if not significantly improved, in order to create more effectiveness and well-being. And still within organizations, we are struggling. A lot of organizations, a lot of teams. I cannot speak for everyone, but most of the clients that I support, this is one topic where we spend a lot of time in is how to improve the type of conversations that you're having with your teams, especially with working with leaders. How can you support your teams to develop their full potential? And this is through conversations. And if it's through conversations, then what are the type of conversations that you need to be having? How do you as a leader need to show yourself open and vulnerable in order for them to feel comfortable enough to be open and vulnerable, to feel safe together? Because there is one thing, Mark, is that if we are not able to create a feeling of safety together, which is done through the type of conversations that we have with each other, we are hindering our ability to be creative and to be innovative, because
Yeah.
creativity and innovation appear more often when people are feeling safe and relaxed, when people are feeling that the other ones are trustworthy and that they consider myself trustworthy. If I'm afraid of showing completely myself, if I don't really trust the people that are in front of me, I'm probably not going to be as creative and innovative as I could be if the situations were different. Does that make sense?
Oh, you're
Mm.
100% speaking my language here. And it's, I often think when we talk about communication, and even especially just when you brought in the business world there, I often think we talk about it as this, nice to have, or we bring in the idea of trust as a nice thing to have, without realizing just how absolutely fundamental it is. If you wanted to, like, we kind of talk about these and kind of things, oh, these are like fuzzy, lovely things. No, like, just purely from a point of view of realizing potential or surfacing more potential, I don't understand how people think that they could actually be fully utilizing their resources and their capacities if everyone, not everyone, but if a lot of people are hiding what they are, hiding what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
even in the realm then of just like, if conflict is needed, like if conflict is needed to address something, we're so afraid to argue. Like, I can have an argument or a fight with my wife, and it will be dealt with there. We'll go to bed that night still embracing each other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go into
Mm-hmm.
too much of my details with my wife after a fight, but you know what I mean. Like, there's still
Yes.
intimacy, there's still love there. There's not
Yes.
like we're not holding on to an argument we had 8 hours ago, because we communicate. We know why we got into the argument. We reflect
Mm-hmm.
on what happened, and we reflect on what needs have been met and not met, and how we're individually feeling. And then this word conflict no longer has to be this personal thing where I'm trying to win or lose, and you lose. So I fully agree with you. I think there's so many areas in which, like, this kind of communicating in both individual, like, personal relationships and the workplace. It's one of the biggest areas I think we have for growth, and therefore optimism about the future in my eyes.
Yes, within organizations and outside, between
Yeah.
organizations and outside of organizations, and now that is all about network building. A lot of people are interested in this. Same thing is the type of conversations that you need to have. You need to be very effective on those, and it is. I connected to something that I first read in the Reinventing Organizations book from Lalou, which is one of the principles that he mentions about the second tier organizations is wholeness, is being
Hmm.
able, and the way that I understand it is that organizations need to create a space or can create spaces for people to appear whole. This means not only the professional me, but the whole me, the whole self that I bring. And how can teams invite each other to appear as whole as possible, as much whole as possible, um, in order for us to really build that trust, not only on the level of competencies, professional competencies, but on the level of humanity. Because at the end, a lot of the things that happen within organizations have to do with the quality of the human aspect of the relationships that we can build with one another. Not necessarily how good we are at what we do, but how good we are at being together, at working together, at communicating together. This is an essential factor for success for any kind of organizations. And as you say, it's interesting to see how many of them still are seeing this as something that is on top of everything else, or something that it would be nice to have, but we don't really spend all the resources and time that we should. um, Knowing that, as you say, I agree with you, that is a foundational aspect of teamwork, is a foundational aspect of building nurturing relationships, is a foundational aspect of encouraging and incentivizing creativity and innovation.
It's interesting the way you framed it there, like that they see it as being important, like something on top. But like I really see this as the root of so much of performance problems, and also the root of um, interpersonal difficulties, whether it's in or outside of the workplace. And
Mm.
you touched on something earlier, which I think we really struggle with in general, just as individuals. So not even necessarily necessarily in a work or even in a relationship context, but just a willingness to also acknowledge our own humanity. Like I think this is something that we really kind of restrict ourselves so much by not being willing to look at, like, where may I have like flaws, if you want to consider them that way, or whatever it may be. Like, what is my actual experience like of being a human? How do I feel when I do certain things? How do I feel when I don't do certain things? And just, I don't know, there's something about getting a little bit comfortable with yourself, in even then to have the capacity or the vocabulary to even share that with another human being, and then by extension then share that with maybe multiple people, whether that's relationships or in a work setting as well. Because I think so much of what we're holding on to is a vision of ourselves that we struggle to maintain. And then that's where a lot of these coping mechanisms come in, by trying to create another version of ourselves that isn't really helpful to the relationships, I think.
Hmm. Yes. You were asking me, Mark, before we started the recording about Biodanza, and if I can share a little bit about
Yeah, yes,
the
please.
type of work that I do there, because one of the ways of defining Biodanza is that it's a space, is a system that supports us to remember what is to be a human. and
Cool.
and remember means being able to tap into this wisdom that we already have in terms of how to, for example, in this case, how to build nurturing relationships. I believe that we have been the culture that we have created. It has been an amazing culture to achieve many different things. Technological development is one clear example of how much this society has given us. And at the same time, I do believe that human relationships have taken a back seat, and we have been prioritizing how to be effective, how to just move forwards, and we're not necessarily as concerned about our own well-being, individual and collective well-being. Um, in Biodanza, this is what we do. In Biodanza, we use the body, we use the movement, we use situations of encounter to, without any words, without any spoken language. So we just have these conversations through the motion of our bodies. And one of the beautiful things that I have learned through my 20-year-old practice of Biodanza is that actually is much easier to agree with someone when both parties are open and present with each other, we can walk together, even if we don't speak.
Hmm.
And if we have the lived experience of walking together to the same rhythm, within the same emotionality, connected from the body and from the soul, then it's much easier to engage in a conversation with an open and honest disposition towards one another. Um, so, in my work with Biodanza, what I see is that I am still learning myself, of course, but supporting others to learn how to create regenerative relationships, so relationships that are nurturing and increase the well-being. That, as I was saying, because my main objective is to support the creation of regenerative cultures within organizations, outside of organizations, and the basis is creating people that know how to build these regenerative relationships in their own personal life. So this is what drives me to keep dancing with people.
Can you explain then to people just maybe even the setting for what biodanza would look like in whether it's in or outside of organizations, just even in that moment between people, and just what the effect of just movement has. Just for
Mm-hmm,
people listening, I was unfortunately it was during the time of COVID, so I didn't get to do it in person with Pablo, but I was blown away by just even some of the movements and the exercises that you put me through. And there's still things that I hold very dear to myself, that in my apartment, that I'll often be doing different types of movements whether it's with my wife, whether it's alone. And that I
mm-hmm,
think there's something really fundamental that in a lot of our investigations, they can be still very mental. Like you could see a psychologist, a therapist, you could talk to people about it, a coach, whatever. And while I'm not saying they're not useful, there's a fundamental element, I think, that is really important that you're touching on here. Is this not just the embodiment, but an expression pre words and pre thought, which I think some of your
mm-hmm.
work taps into, which I find really fascinating.
Yes, yes, I can share a little bit more details about the work that I do in Biodanza. But before I do that, I fully agree with you. There is a difference between talking about something and actually embodying that something. And in this case, I do acknowledge and we have been talking about this since the beginning of this conversation, is how important it is to have good conversations with the people that you're with. So to talk about how do we want to relate to one another, absolutely key. And at the same time, the experience of embodying that, of really being able to walk together with others, being able to dance together with others to the same rhythm, it creates like a somatic anchor or somatic anchors. This means it gives me the lived feeling in my body of what does it mean for me to be able to show myself in front of others and to be there for one another, which is something that takes the experience deeper than just having it as a mental cognitive understanding of something. Yeah. And it's supportive of us actually the practice, the embodying something. It is part of the learning process. Yeah, it is important to be aware of the things that we need to change, but it's also important to practice this new coherence, these new ways of being. And biodanza is a space for us to practice. It's a laboratory for us to remember what does it mean to be a human, and in this case specifically, what does it mean to build nurturing relationships. Having said that, then biodanza, as you say, it can also be done online, and especially during the pandemic, this is what we discovered, that it actually works as well online and virtually. But normally, it's done as an in-person practice, so people come together, and we open a ceremonial space for awareness and transformation. So me as a teacher, my role is to create the feeling of safety and clarity for people to start exploring through different exercises, different invitations that are the excuse to try out new different ways of relating with yourself, with others, and with the world. And through that practice, without words, just movement, just connection, and of course with music, because the music helps lower the defense mechanisms of our ego.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we are more open to explore, and through the regular practice of these explorations, a new way of being is embodied that is much more aligned with what we consider life affirming dynamics. So we live lives that are more life affirming, if the
Yeah, yeah.
redundance fits. Yeah.
And so in how does the because I haven't experienced the in-person version of this, so how does the interaction then between the different, do people face each other, do they interact, do they dance, do they, like, is it a
There,
free movement?
it is not a, so in principle it is not a free movement, because normally what happens is that even in terms of movement, we all have our comfort zones. So if
Hmm.
you know how you dance, and because it's the way that Mark dances, and everyone has their own way of dancing. If they go to clubs, is you have your moves. Of course, every now and then you try out new things, but you have your moves. Yeah. So this means you have already your embodied coherence. And if we just leave the space open for people, just a free dance, just to go there where you normally move in the same way that you normally move, go there where you normally go, the spaces for learning are not going to be that big. So it needs to be guided in order to invite people to move in different ways, to relate in different ways. And this is the invitation to move out of their comfort zone into their learning zone, and start realizing that there might be different possibilities for me to move through life, to move in my relationships, that might open new possibilities for me to be. So it is a semi guided dance journey, um, that is also an invitation to go into trance states, because we work also with the polarities of our nervous system, and we invite people to go into expanded states of consciousness, where the lessons can be that come out of that are even deeper.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's not something that I understand only cognitively. It's something that my body is fully invested in. Uh, and this is a great way to learn, that in a way we take little advantage of.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, the dance sounds like a metaphor for how we perceive life, how we think about life, how we can
Hmm.
approach life. And I
Hmm.
love this sense of entering a kind of state of trance, or even maybe a chance to suspend completely how we're even thinking or thinking at all,
Hmm.
to exist in a space that we can almost get a glimmer of a hint of something, and then come back into our own, let's say, regular consciousness, but having understood something absolutely fundamental or deep.
Yes, that's it. You described it perfectly. Is we journey into a place where we can remember what does it mean to be human, and then we come back with that experience in our bodies, and with the regular practice of going there, remembering, and coming back, eventually our embodied self, our coherence, starts shifting into more life affirming dynamics.
But this also sounds like the real antidote almost to, and I know it's probably a bit of a dated view to think of somebody, lots of people going into an office with a shirt and a tie on.
Hmm.
So even if that isn't the reality for everyone's office experience anymore, there does seem to be like a rigid and fixed, almost like the approach of, if you go to the gym and you just do certain mechanical movements up and down,
Hmm.
completely straight ahead with very little kind of horizontal movement, or different things like this. This does really seem to be like a physical, embodied way of just rattling our cages a little bit, like getting out of our structure,
Hmm.
opening our minds up. And I'm not even just talking about like the working scenario, because I often find it very funny when people are having guests over and they're all friends and people are stressing about their friends coming over. I'm like, what are we doing in life that we're uptight about people we love coming to spend time with us? Like, what are we doing? So I don't know. There's something in what you're clearly very passionate about that I think it's a real antidote to some of that stiffness or that stuckness that I think a lot of people experience in life.
Yes, definitely. It teaches us also to be resilient,
Hmm.
and to be able to adjust and adapt, while at the same time teaches you how to put boundaries, say no, and stand for what you believe. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's not only about just accommodating myself. Yes, resilient could be understood as that I have so adaptable that I can accommodate myself to everything. Yes and no, because there are some moments in which accommodating yourself is actually a bad idea. It's a bad strategy. So it also helps you to build those core um, embodied dispositions of being resolute when you need to be resolute, of being open when you need to be open, of being flexible when you need to be creative, of being grounded when you need to stand your ground, of being expansive when you need to expand, or bringing your energy in when you need to bring it in. And this is, as you were saying, these are metaphors of the things that we actually need in life on a daily basis.
How have you found implementing some of the like Biodanza in corporate settings? Then
Mm.
I'd be perfectly honest. Like before I did that course at you, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to dance in front of other people. And it turned out to be my favorite part of it. Coming from, I'm sure maybe the culture is different. Like I know you mentioned before, growing up in Colombia versus
Yeah.
growing up as an Irishman, where we need 10 pints of Guinness. Uh, but I absolutely loved it. But I would think that if I heard that I almost this was coming into my workspace and that this is going to be something I have to do, I think I'd almost be once I'd have been even more petrified. But like
Yeah, yeah, of
I can
course.
imagine that it has very like particularly in that setting, it could have really profound effects.
It has, yes, but you're right. One of the principles that we have in our work is to meet people where they are, and there
Mm.
is a big difference between me teaching a biodanza in an open group. So this means with people that want to be there, that have chosen consciously to be there, than offer biodanza in an organizational context where in most cases people didn't freely chose to be there, but they were somehow brought there as a part of any kind of organizational development program or initiative. So uh, taking into consideration this principle of meeting people where they are, in an open session we normally start the sessions standing in a circle, gathered by the hands. This is a very powerful metaphor, because in a circle there is nobody that is above or on top of anyone or below of anyone, or there is no one that is in front of anybody else or behind anybody else. It's like we are all in the same line, we're all in the same level, we're all in the same, we're all connected. And this is a metaphor of co-creation, of the safe space for us to be able to co-create. Yeah, and that's the starting point in an open group. In some organizational contexts, I've needed to go to step -2, not even step 0, and end the process in step 1. This means that in some cases, after a 1 day workshop, 2 day workshop, I've been able to invite a team to stand at the end of the workshop, to stand in a circle, look into each other's eyes, acknowledge each other's presence, and hold each other's hand as a metaphor of the togetherness that they share. And this has been powerful enough for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's when we were talking about maybe underutilizing, I don't want to make it resources so human sounds so something like
Hmm.
that their inherent value is from a productivity point of view, but when we were talking about just the elements of relationships that we don't connect with that could really lead to us having much more enjoyable, prosperous lives in terms of the connection we feel with one another. This very simple act of just looking into each other's eyes, like it's
Yeah.
sometimes I think the solutions don't have to be that complicated. We just almost have
Mm,
to remember, you know, how a baby's eyes may constantly look for the eyes
mm,
of another. Like there's something deeply connecting, and also something that almost sheds a lot of our judgment and our conditioning of what we think of somebody else just merely by looking at
mhm,
them in the eyes.
Yes, yes. And of course, in an organizational setting, we then debrief this type of experiences, make sense together, this type of experiences, and then support the teams to bring this into something that is useful for them in their day to day. Yeah, is not only in an organizational setting is not only having the experience, but then making sense of the experience is equally as important.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it is embodiment. The way that we see it in an organizational context is one other approach that is not necessarily helping teams to move forward, but is helping teams to go deeper. And that sense of depth is what supports the creation of trust and the feeling of togetherness, which, as we have said a couple of times already in this call, are foundational for then teams to be able to move forward how they want to move forward.
You know, I think just when we've mentioned trust, like just in a, even in a general way of human relating, I think we often think of trust as almost like that's something that can be earned if somebody behaves perfectly. You know, and if you continuously do the right thing by me, then you will earn my trust. You know, but I think as
Yeah.
when we consider even in very potentially loving relationships that we can still hurt each other, and you know, this could even just be with siblings, with whoever, like you know, we can still hurt each other, even in
Mm-hmm.
very loving relationships. So I think again, so much of the trust, you know, even at the very start of the conversation, you were saying like there's relationships in an intimate sense with a partner, with a lover. So much of it's driven by fear. We both had that shared experience of fear being a big driver of our behavior. But I don't know, there's something about just really even the idea of looking at someone, and the idea of trying to build intimacy and trust is, and the idea of really just looking at someone is like there's something deeper even beyond our functional ideas of conditional trust that I think
Mm-hmm.
we can connect with through some of the even the modalities or the ideas that you're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned that, Mark, because trust is something that I consider fundamental for teamwork, especially in an organizational context. Teamwork cannot exist and is not going to work, is not going to function if there is no trust. And everybody can agree with that. Yeah, if there is no trust, we might as well be just a group of people trying to do something together, but not really a team. Yeah? So and but what I have seen in introducing this concept of trust in teamwork is that most people intuitively know what trust is, but have difficulties explaining what that is and putting it into words. And why is that important? Is that because if we cannot create a useful operational definition of trust, then we cannot actually work on the trust levels in a relationship. Yeah, consciously we cannot do it because we don't really understand what we're talking about, even if we have the somatic experience of feeling trust or feeling distrust in some moments. Yeah. So one of the things that I do with the team is try to define what trust is, and just very briefly in a nutshell, if you're interested, I can share with you what how I define
Yeah,
trust,
yeah, please, yeah.
which is first of all, trust is an emotion. It's something that is felt.
Hmm.
Yeah, is something. Of course, it has a cognitive component, and we'll get to that. But it's something that you experience in your body. Yeah, if you find yourself in during the night in a dark alley and you see somebody coming, you feel in your body if you can trust, if it's a trustful situation or not. And depending on the judgment that you make and the feelings that you have, you will make certain decisions. Yeah, so it's something that it involves the whole self, the experience of trust or distrust. That is important to acknowledge. The second thing is that it's an emotion that affects positively or negatively the action coordination between people within a setting of a team or in a loving relationship as well. So if you consider, if you judge that every time that I say that I'm going to be on time here, I am, then it's going to be much easier for you to trust me the next time that we are planning to do something together.
Yeah.
And on the other hand as well, if I'm never there where I'm supposed to be, then you're going to be extra cautious whenever you want to coordinate actions with me in the future. Yeah, so it's an emotion, it's a lived embodied experience that affects positively or negatively the action coordination between people. That's one thing. And then cognitively speaking, there is a traditional way of understanding trust, which is the judgment that I have about a person, which is expressed normally in I don't trust you, or I don't trust this person, or I trust you. Yeah, as you can see, in that way of using the definition of trust, we are judging the whole self because of something that he or she might have done or not. Yeah, and again, this is not an this one is the big problem when it comes to trust, is that when we judge the whole self, then because I cannot change the self, then I cannot change the levels of trust in that relationship. I cannot make you change. So then, if I don't trust you and I judge you untrustworthy, then I might as well just leave it because I cannot do anything. So, but then the question is, how do we change the definition of trust in order to make it operational? And the way that I do it is that it's not the judgment that I have of someone, is the judgment that I have of the actions of someone in a specific domain. As you can see, this is a different judgment. This is not the judgment of the person, is the judgments of the action of the person, and not all actions of the person, but the
Right.
actions in a specific domain. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are three different sub judgments, and which is the sincerity, is how much do I judge that what you're telling me is what you're thinking? How much is the judgment that I have regarding the coherence between your inner conversation and what you're telling me, your outer conversation? That's one. The second one is competency, which is the specific domains. What do I mean by that? We are all humans are trustworthy to do some things, more or less to do others, and not at all to do others. Yeah, it's not that a human being is trustworthy to do everything. So it is important to talk about competencies. Is what am I competent on? What am I competent for? And then am I able to build trust on those areas where I'm competent, and also say whenever I'm not competent to do something, so that people can also trust me when I say no. And the third one, very briefly, is reliability, is the history, is what I was saying before about, and this you can see this very well in companies, because companies can also be reliable, and some of them, for example, really sell themselves. The auto industry is all about reliability and innovation. Yeah, so if you buy a car and that car is amazing, and is most likely that whenever you're in the market for another car, you will buy a car from the same kind of car because it has been trustworthy. On the other hand as well, if the car is all the time breaking down, you're not going to buy another car from this company. So this is the way that we present trust, in order for people to start checking their relationships and saying, where do I feel that why do I feel that the trust in this relationship is not great? It might be because I judge that this person has not been sincere with me. It is because this person says that is competent in some things when he or she really isn't, or it has been because in the past this person has said that they will do something they haven't. And using that definition, then teams and partners can actually have different conversations than I trust you or don't. Is whenever you do this, My judgment is that you could do it even better in order for me to increase the trust that I have on you when you do that. You see the
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's, I don't know, there's the element of trust. You know, when you mentioned earlier, just the idea of reimagining society. I know when we like the different elements that we even talked about it at that stage, but like I do think that this trust just amongst each other, whether in organizations, outside of organizations, I
Mm-hmm.
think this could be one of the fundamental leaps that we have forward that could undo a lot of the harm that we're doing, whether it's in relationships, environmentally, whatever it may be. I think there's something, whether it's through trust and human connection. I think those are two areas that I think are so kind of ripe for new ways, because I think those are some of the areas that we're suffering in the most as well as human beings, and I think they're areas that we really underappreciate. So I think the different layering of that, I think, is really interesting for people to contemplate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with you. It is part of this quantum leap that we are, this transition
Yeah,
that I believe we're all in. Yes.
Pablo, just conscious of the time here. I was laughing at one point in my head there, thinking only with you I could have a conversation around the traditional and non-traditional ideas of relating and relationships, biodanza, and then corporate work as well, all in the same conversation. A unique trifecta of interests, but all somewhat connected as well, I believe. But just over the course of the relationship, look, you've talked so much about the importance of relating, honesty, openness, communication, awareness, even around fear, but also like an openness to your own humanity, to the other person's humanity. Just this idea, even then, of seeing things, embodying things, feeling things. You know, the idea of building resilience, being creative, building flexibility in our approach, using these ideas of biodanza as a metaphor for life, to engage in life and to feel again. And then obviously this big element of trust that we've just touched on as well. Look, you've given so many interesting angles, I think, for people to contemplate. But to ask you the final question, Pablo, what is a good life for you, sir?
A good life is a life where the relationships that are around me are clean,
Hmm.
in the sense that the communication is so clear and transparent that we can actually see one another. I believe that's a key element to have a good life.
I would echo those sentiments 100%. And I know I've
Mhm.
said there's underappreciated areas of life, but I think that is possibly one of the most underappreciated elements of just how clean your relationships are. That doesn't mean everyone's behaving perfectly. It just means there's absolute transparency of what is, and an acknowledgement and a
Mm.
sharing of that. So, Pablo, I'm so happy that we had this conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the What Is a Good Life podcast. I'll be hitting you up for some parenting advice in the next few weeks. And who knows, maybe we'll
Please
see each
do.
other around
Yes.
Berlin.
Yes, we're actually, so every now and then we meet down in the street because we're rather somehow neighbors. So
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Mark, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for this invitation, for this platform, for this space. Super happy always to connect to you.